A reading from the Gospel of Matthew. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, "Listen, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen." So, do we have ears? Are we listening? This is a strange week for me to be recording sermons because we have the first half of the famous parable of the sower. And then the action stops, and tomorrow you will hear conversation about parables. And then the explanation of the parable of the sower is going to be coming later in the week, on another day when it so happens I am down to be preaching this little sermon. So I have half a parable to work with this morning, or rather I have a parable but no explanation. And it raises the question, do we have ears? Let anyone, says Jesus, who has ears, listen. Well, that should include us, because humans, like most creatures, are created with ears. We do hear. Can we listen? The parables are strange, wonderful, complex things that we get in the richness of Matthew, Mark, and Luke's Gospels. They are clearly Jesus using things immediately around him to say, look at that, look at this. Do you see the point you can get from it? Do you see something about God in creation that makes a simple, quick point about God's love? Some of the parables do not repay forensic, detailed examination. They're intended to be quick and fairly accessible pieces of teaching. So do we have ears? And if so, are we listening? Our reading this morning ends rather frustratingly. At least it's frustrating if we need to hear the explanation. But it ought to be obvious. And I suspect everyone who's watching this video has, of course, heard the parable many times before, which makes it even easier to understand. Jesus doesn't really need to explain parables. Grace doesn't really need explaining. Love does not really need explaining. But it's amazing how even the most pious, committed members of church, let alone anyone else, it's amazing just how easy it is for us not to listen. We get to this with children sometimes. I remember so often a teacher saying, quite often to me in a class, "Are you listening?" And I heard the sound going on of the teacher's voice droning on, but I wasn't, of course, listening. I was missing out on learning something about the world. Sometimes we do not listen to the clear and wonderful sounds of God's love for us and for all people. Jesus, in the parables, whatever else he is teaching, whatever other point he is making, Jesus is always in the parables saying, wake up, open your eyes, open your ears. Don't just hear, listen to the richness and the fullness of God's kingdom and God's love. Amen.